Well, good morning, Smythe Street Church. I am so glad to be with you, even though I'd rather be there in person. It's great to connect in this online way. I don't know if you know this, but I'm actually from New Brunswick. I was born in Moncton, grew up there, went to high school there. I've got Fredericton family. I'm sure that they're tuning in today. I can't tell you how much I'd like to be there in the Atlantic bubble. But let me start my message this morning with this. On behalf of all of us at World Vision Canada and World Vision Haiti, I want to express our profound gratitude to all of you at Smythe Street Church, and actually all of Fredericton through the FreddyLink initiative, where you are making a difference in the lives of vulnerable children, families, and communities in some of the poorest parts of Haiti, including the Morne-Pele Area Development Program. We also want to deeply honor and thank your lead pastor, Werner Drost. We are really grateful for how he is leading you in showing what it means to follow Jesus. Following Jesus through the work in Haiti, but also right here in Fredericton. So thanks. As a fellow New Brunswicker, you all make me proud. Well, let's talk about what following Jesus means. And I'd like to share with you this morning this big idea. Following Jesus means going to the margins. Do you know what I mean when I talk about margins? Well, here's an illustration that comes from a movie, The Lion King. You know that movie. It's one of Disney's most famous. It came out in 1994. That was a few years before my kids were born, but I can tell you that The Lion King was on repeat on our DVD player for many years. So you may remember this scene. It's a scene early in the morning when Simba wakes his father up, who's the king, and asks him to show him his kingdom. Now I'm going to I put on my best James Earl Jones voice. I don't think it's going to work very well. But they sat looking out over the sunrise. And Mufasa the king says this, "One day, Simba, the sun will set on my time here and will rise with you as the new king." And Simba looks out. Remember what he says? "And this will all be mine?" And Mufasa replies, "Everything the light touches." Simba says, "Everything the light touches?" But then he looks out to the edges, kind of the margins of his kingdom, and says, "What about those shadowy places?" Well, Mufasa is pretty stern when he replies, "That is beyond our borders, and you must never go there, Simba." Mufasa, the Lion King, in other words, just told Simba to stay away from the margins. That's a place where you don't go. Did you ever get a Mufasa-like warning growing up? Were there places where your parents told you not to go? Maybe staying safe was the priority. Maybe it was a street or a neighborhood or a certain part of town. The place that you were perhaps asked to stay away from was probably a poor place, a place maybe where people were different. So instead of being told to go there and make a difference, we were instead guided to avoid these places. Margins are shadowy places. They're messy places, places where to varying degrees you might find difficult problems, desperate people, and dangerous environments. You know, at World Vision, we spend a lot of time in the world's margins, on the edges of the world, and we're going to share why later in this message. But we also want to focus on one example of the world's margins, a place where we are working together, and that's the country of Haiti. It's one of the world's most difficult places to be a child. And today it's even more challenging because of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Last week I had the opportunity to speak by Zoom with our National Director at World Vision Haiti, Julie Lee. Julie Lee and I talked about the work that World Vision is doing in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, about the needs of children in Haiti and how we can help. I know you'll find that conversation interesting and enlightening as we think about how we can continue our partnership. But let's come back to the big idea of today, that following Jesus means going to the margins. It means going to care for those in those shadowy places. Why do we do this? We do it because it's what Jesus did. I want to look at a short text from the Gospel of John, John chapter 4, where Jesus ventures into the margins of his world. You're probably familiar with the story of the woman at the well in John 4. It is a wonderful story of hope and faith, and it certainly could use a full explanation and description. But we're just going to look at the introduction. It's actually just the first about 5 verses from John 4 to 9, to see what we can learn about Jesus going to the margins. And this is where we pick up the story. Let me read the text from John 4 to 9. He, that's Jesus, had to go through Samaria on the way. Eventually he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar, near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. And she said to Jesus, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" Let me share a little background from the first century when we understand this in this context. We've got to keep in mind that Jews and Samaritans were not friends. In fact, they would have considered themselves enemies. It was a deep divide over the issue of religion. Jews and Samaritans, even though they came from the same background, they spoke the same language, they had very different ideas about where to worship, what holy book to use, and so on. The first thing I'd like to draw your attention to in the text is that Jesus says that Jesus had to go through Samaria. The language is actually quite strong in the original text. Often this word it's translated as "it is necessary." Now, let me just kind of show you the geography. If this is Judea down here in the south, and Jesus is going up to Galilee in the north, on this side is the Mediterranean Sea, on this side is the desert. So the direct line to get from Judea to Galilee would have been straight through Samaria. But that's not the way good Jews went. They went around. They tried to avoid going through Samaria, or at least minimizing the time that they had to be in this enemy land. So there had to be another reason for Jesus to go that way. This language "had to" is really strong. There are Bible translation handbooks that say we should think about this almost as a divine necessity. It must have been God's will or God's purpose that Jesus should pass through Samaria. There were other ways to get where he was going, and Samaria was on the margin for Jews, and yet it was this divine necessity for Jesus to go through this marginal place. Second, we know that the Father's heart is for those who are on the margins. In John's Gospel, there is a really interesting theology where Jesus is seen to be the imitator of his Father. In John 5:17, he's accused of working on the Sabbath, and he defends himself by saying, "My Father's always at work on this day, and I too am working." So he's looking to what God does, and he seeks to imitate. Jesus is the obedient one. He imitates what the Father does. He obeys his Father's command in every way. Jesus is in step with God. So much so that when Jesus says to his disciples that the one who sees him, Jesus, also sees the Father. My pastor sometimes says that Jesus, we should think of him as God with skin on. And not only the skin on the outside, but he shares the Father's heart. And it's a heart that beats for those in the margins. Another interesting piece of information in the scriptures is the use of the word nearby. Did you catch how deep the history is of God's story for the Jewish people that's actually near this Samaritan village? In verse 4, we're told that Sychar, the place where they are, is near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there too. Jacob and Joseph are big names in the Old Testament storyline. And when we look at what the word nearby means, and see it in this Bible passage, did you know that it's the same word that's translated as neighbor? All you have to do is add an article like the word "the" to the Greek term, and it literally means the nearby ones, which is translated as neighbors. So this is when Jesus gives us the great commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. This is the same word that he's describing here to describe Samaria, describing people in the margins. Jesus is essentially trumpeting, hey Jews, you're connected to this story. And the people here are your neighbors. Now we look at the interaction that he has with the woman at the well, and Jesus goes even further into the margins. Not only has he entered a region that is off limits to most Jews, but he interacts with one person who is, in fact, in her own margins. Women in this culture were second class. A Jewish man talking alone with a woman who was not his wife was unheard of. But there's even more to this story. When we see Jesus interacting with the woman at the well, we know that she's an outcast. There were no other women there. She came to draw water in the heat of the day. I've visited lots of World Vision programs, lots of parts in the developing world, and I can tell you just how central an amazing social gathering place wells are in communities. It's a place of connection, a place of growth, a place of social time, often for women in the community and their kids. But this woman is at the well alone. She's ostracized. You get the sense that her Samaritan community has put her out in this shadowy place. It's a telltale sign of her being in the margins. And yet, as she stood there at the well, Jesus, in a single sentence, indicates that he sees her as valuable and not rejected. Please give me some water, he says. Jesus even shows that he's willing to drink from her ladle. That was shocking even to her. So she says to Jesus, how can you even ask me that? Now, John 4 goes on to tell a remarkable story, including the moment when Jesus reveals himself to be the Messiah, the first time in his ministry, not to a king or to a religious leader or even to his disciples, but to this woman. We'll leave the rest of that story, though, for another sermon, because we've got so much we can learn just from this profound introduction, that God's heart is for those in the margins. That the Son of God, Jesus, in perfect imitation of his Father, went to the margins. That the people in the margins are our neighbors. God is a God of the margins. His love reaches out to the edges, the fringes, to the shadowy places. So you probably get where we're going and where God wants to lead us. Following Jesus leads us to the margins. If you and I want to follow Jesus, it is necessary to go to the margins. If we are to be Christ-like, Christ-minded, Christ-led, our new trajectory is to move out of the center to the margins. And we even see that in the story, that the story includes people who follow Jesus in the margins right here. Those, of course, are his disciples. Jesus wasn't in Samaria on his own. He brought the disciples with him. They're out on the margins with Jesus. Jesus showed them a different way. They didn't understand everything. They didn't understand Jesus half the time, it seems. But they followed him, and everything changed. So how do we follow Jesus out to the margins? Of course, we can find families, people, communities on the margins nearby to where we are. Here in Mississauga, right near you in Fredericton as well. Some of the margins that we see are hidden ones. It doesn't take us long to think of marginalized people or groups. But when we see how Jesus sees, we notice them differently. Now at World Vision, we have a particular calling to follow Jesus to the margins in some of the world's toughest places, usually outside of our context, beyond our borders. To us, these places, they may be remote, however difficult, they're dangerous in shadow, they're all nearby. In the Gospel of Matthew 25, Jesus talks about people that he calls the least of these. Who are the least of these in the world today? Many of them are in fragile places like Haiti or other challenging parts of the world. And that's why I believe that this is where our partnership between this local church, Smythe Street, and World Vision works on so many levels. Together, we're able to provide a connection point, an on-ramp, if you will, to people who are on the global margins. Let's go back just for a moment to the snapshot of the story. We talked about the 12 disciples who are out in the market, but where did they get the money to buy the food? Where did they get the resources? It's important to remember that there were other people walking with Jesus through this time. Disciples that we don't see show up at this part of the story, but we know were providing the resources needed. The entire Samaritan mission that started in John chapter 4, and Jesus' 2-day visit to that territory was facilitated by people who themselves weren't able to be there. But their partnership with Jesus was the catalyst for an entire people to begin their journey toward Jesus. You are that partner with World Vision. You are helping us reach the extreme margins of our world. Supporting organizations like ours helps us to provide emergency response, especially in the face of COVID-19, helping to meet extraordinary needs of children. We know that the pandemic is making kids even more vulnerable. You're helping us to change children's lives through child sponsorship. And you're helping us to stand up against injustice, like that faced by these girls in Afghanistan who are together learning about how to fight child marriage. But let's hear firsthand from Julie Lee, our National Director in Haiti, about the impact of the pandemic in Haiti, how your partnership is helping us reach those on the margins, and what we can do together. So welcome, Julie. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. And thank you so much to the entire Smythe Street Church for your support for Haiti and the most remote communities that we serve in. Thank you so much.
We really want to hear about what's going on in Haiti right now, particularly with the pandemic. But before we do that, just tell us a little bit about what your role is and what are the big picture needs of Haiti right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, I am currently the National Director for World Vision here in Haiti, and basically what my role is to help facilitate our ministry here in Haiti. World Vision, we are in the front lines. Wherever there is a need, we are there. And a country like Haiti, the needs are basically endless. Haiti is a country that is known to be afflicted by external shock after shock. And historically, it is one of the poorest nations in the Western Hemisphere. So the amount of most vulnerable girls and boys in this country is staggering. I would say that more than half of the population in Haiti right now would be living under the poverty line. So World Vision's work in Haiti really is lifting people out of poverty, supporting them through the most challenging times, but giving them the capacity and the empowerment to not just receive external aid, but to have the capacity and the voice to help themselves to bring their community and their generation out of this perpetual cycle of need.
I know so many members of Smythe Street Church and members of people who live in Fredericton actually sponsor children in Haiti with World Vision, particularly in the Morne-Pili area program. So what does that look like? How do we keep our promise to sponsor children and their families during this time, specifically in that context?
Most vulnerable children, girls and boys, first and foremost, they have need for clean water. With COVID-19, it's even more critical to have access to clean water. And before COVID-19 hit Haiti in Morne-Pili, what we saw was more than half of the population didn't have access to clean water within 30-minute walking distance. That would mean girls and boys, they needed to spend a significant amount of time in their day fetching water, making 2 or 3 trips in a day just to get the drinking water that they would need at homes. And once they got that water, they would probably realize they're late for school, or most of the day that they could use for either their studies or for playing to be children was already gone. So we recognized that water was critical. And one of the things that we prioritized this year, even during COVID-19, was how do we bring water access closer to these girls and boys?
Let's think about that just for a moment so that our listeners understand. So one of the directions is to wash our hands frequently. But what you're saying is in Morne-Pili, in fact, many children, there's just no source of clean water for that to happen, right? So one of the key areas, the things that we do to prevent COVID-19 or any number of other diseases is simply not available, right?
Mm-hmm. Families don't even have drinking water. And whatever drinking water they have, they prioritize for drinking. They wouldn't use it for hand washing. So the first thing that we did was we recognized that we have to change that behavior. But in order to change that behavior, we can't just sit and talk. We need to kick into action. We need to help them have access to water. So one of the very first things we did was help families gain access to water within 30-minute walking distance, because anything beyond 30 minutes, the water that they get would be so precious that they would keep it just to drink and not to wash their hands or to sanitize their, which is also critical for COVID-19 prevention. So in the course of this past 6 months, 12 months actually, World Vision has been able to increase water access to about 10 to 15% more of the most vulnerable families by creating more water access points. And with these water access points that World Vision creates, they could come either in the form of boreholes, or they could come in the form of kiosks. And these kiosks and boreholes, whatever water system we install, we make sure that the water is already treated. So it's already safe for drinking. And in fact, families, because it's much more accessible, they can use it to wash their hands.
So I have a glass of water here that I'm drinking, but the typical water source in Haiti before getting treated water looks nothing like this, does it?
Nope. It's not even transparent.
Yeah. But, we think about this and the stories that you're telling, really, we can think of that water is life. And, Smythe Street Church is making a commitment to see if we can raise more resources to get to you, to Morne-Pelé, for more water interventions. And of course, that is about providing clean water through boreholes or kiosks, but it's more than that, isn't it? It's sanitation, it's hygiene, it's this water treatment. It even has economic development impacts for building a sustainable community. So the gift of water, the gift of clean water to these children, it literally changes lives.
Exactly. We allow children to be children again. So many children have told us that in the past they would spend more than an hour and a half of their day just fetching water, taking a empty gallon or jerry can to the water point, filling it up, coming back home, and repeating that 2 to 3 times in a day. The thing is, they don't do it alone. They do it with all their other siblings that they have. So a group of children, of 3 to 5 children per household, they would need to do it at least 3 times in order to satisfy the water needs. But these children, they would do it at the expense of their studies, or they would do it at the expense of just being children. So giving them access to clean water helps them be children again. But at the same time, it helps them feel safe. That's the most important thing. I recall a lot of mothers telling World Vision that in the past, whenever they drank the water that they had in their communities, they wouldn't know if they would get sick. And if they got sick, they wouldn't know if they would be able to afford going to the doctor. Or even if they went to the doctor, they wouldn't even know if the doctor or the nurse would be at the health center. So there would be a lot of what ifs. But just the fact of having clean water, being accessible, helps them to have peace of mind, helps them know that when I drink this water, my children will not get sick because of that water. And they would be able to focus on other things.
This is a challenging time for you, for your team, certainly for you as a leader and personally. How has your Christian faith sustained you during this challenging time of uncertainty?
I would say our Christian faith, not just myself, but for all of World Vision Haiti, it is the main source of energy we have. If you live in Haiti and you see the situation on a daily basis, you can't help but wonder, how do we continue? You can't help but wonder what is going on. Why do we have so much injustice and vulnerability? But our faith is the answer. It tells us why we are here in Haiti. When there is so much injustice, we know that we are here for a reason, for this season. We are called to really make a difference during this time. When nothing makes sense in Haitian society, when political leaders are leading the country into chaos, when basic services are completely inexistent, when we see injustice after injustice, we know that we are here at the right time. Even when situations get difficult, we know that God is always in control, and where there is no reason from a human perspective, God put World Vision here for a reason. God put each and every one of us here for a reason, to really shine and glorify his name during this time. Everything we do for the most vulnerable girls and boys, we don't do it for our own sake. We don't do it for our own performance. We do it because God has called us to do it.
Julie, I'm really glad that the people of Smythe Street Church and those who are listening have had a chance to hear from you direct from Haiti to understand what's going on the ground there. What words of encouragement or gratitude do you have for people listening today?
I would say, first of all, thank you. A deep, deep thanks to every person in Smythe Street Church. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your prayers. And this thanks isn't just coming from me. It's coming from every single person in the World Vision Haiti family. It's coming from all the children we have supported. It's also coming from the communities that you have supported, and also the entire country of Haiti, because we have been able to make an impact, a lasting impact, because of your support. And thank you for being there to support us during the most challenging of times. Of course, Haiti is still in a very difficult situation. The external shocks continue to affect Haiti, including COVID-19, including the political turmoil, including all the food insecurity that we're experiencing because of climate change. Haiti is not out of the woods yet. So thank you for all your past support, but also a deep encouragement to continue to partner with World Vision, because you have been able to make a lasting impact that goes beyond generations, and we would like to continue that path with you.
Julie, thank you so much. Please give our greetings and blessings to your team and to the children and families in Morne-Pelé. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
God bless you.
God bless.
So grateful to Julie for spending time with me last week. I hope you heard her passion and commitment to the children and families in Haiti and in Morne-Pelé. And I was also struck as I heard her emphasis on the need for clean water as a critical part of our response to ensure that kids are healthy and can thrive. Comes right back to that story about Jesus in Samaria with the woman at the well. In some ways, the community in Morne-Pelé are even more marginalized than the community in Samaria in Jesus' time. That community at least had access to clean water, a place where they could come and be sure that the children were receiving clean water for their families. This is what we want to provide, this basic level of support to children and families as they struggle and fight to meet the needs of the pandemic. Let's reach to the margins together. Let's continue to listen to and respond to God's call. Let's see what Jesus sees. To reach out with love even to the world's toughest and shadowiest places. To reach the world's most vulnerable children. Friends, thank you so much for letting me join you today. Thank you for your commitment to Haiti, to the children and families that we're serving there, for your ongoing partnership. God bless you.